Good afternoon, students. As today I am going to teach you about the respiratory system in humans. Now before I start the respiratory system in humans, first we see that what is system. So a system is a group of organs that work together to carry out a particular task. In our previous video also I have explained this to you that what is system? It is a group of organs that work together to carry out a particular task. So we can say here, like we can take an example. If we take about the respiratory system, there are so many organs like nose, like trachea, like mouth, like pharynx, and like bronchi and lungs. All these organs, they work together to perform a special task, and that is known as respiration. So the system is a group of organs that work together to carry out a particular task. Now we see that what are the organs associated with the respiratory system. Now the first one is nose or nasal cavity. Second is pharynx, or we can say it throat region. Then larynx, or we can say voice box. Then trachea or windpipe. Then bronchi and lungs. So these are the organs which are associated with the respiratory system. Now we study in detail about all these organs. So we start with the respiratory system in humans. Now the first organ is the nose. Now we see that what is the function of nose. Nose or nasal cavity. Air enters the nose through the openings called nostrils. This we all know that we inhale air through our nose, and we inhale that air through the openings called nostrils. While passing through the nostrils, which are lined up with the hair, air is filtered and is made free of dust and germs, which get trapped in the hair of nostrils. Now while passing through the nostrils, when this air passes through the nostrils, the hair that is lined up inside the nostrils, they filter that air and made that air free of dust and germs and bacteria, and if there is any kind of bacteria, it gets trapped in the hair of the nostrils. So this is the function of nose or nasal cavity. Now the nasal passage brings the air to the body temperature, that is, warm up the air before it enters the lungs, and also moisten the air. So the other use of nasal passage is that it brings the air to the body temperature. That means it warms up the air before it enters in the lungs, and it also moistens the air. So this is the function of nose or nasal cavity. Now we see the second organ. Now the second organ is pharynx. Now we see the function of pharynx. So this throat region is known as pharynx, and from the nasal cavity, air flows into the pharynx or throat region. Then in pharynx or throat region, we can say both food pipe and windpipe open. In this pharynx, both the pipes are there, the food pipe as well as the windpipe. Now windpipe lies in the front region of the neck. The windpipe lies here in the front region of the neck, and food pipe lies behind the windpipe. Remember this, children, that windpipe, it lies in front of the neck, and food pipe lies behind the windpipe. Then it is a common passage for food and air. as both the food pipe and windpipe are there in the throat region, so this passage is a common passage for food and air. Now the air from pharynx moves to the larynx, that is known as voice box. Now from here, from the pharynx, the air moves to the larynx. Now you can see here that this part in the throat region is known as larynx or voice box. Now we see the function of larynx. So children, larynx, it is also known as voice box. It is a rectangular box-like structure, also called voice box. Now this larynx is also known as voice box. It helps in producing sound, so that is why it is known as voice box. Then third point, it also prevents food from entering into windpipe. That is, it leads into a tube called trachea. Now this windpipe, this larynx, it also prevents the food from entering into the windpipe, and this leads to the tube called trachea. So remember this, children, that this larynx is also known as voice box, and it helps in producing sound, and it prevents the food entering into the windpipe. That is why it leads into a tube and it is known as trachea. Now children, after larynx comes the trachea or the windpipe. Now we see its function. So the trachea or windpipe. The air from larynx passes into a tube-like structure called trachea. Now as I told you that after the larynx, the air comes into a tube-like structure, and that tube-like structure is known as trachea. Now it is supported by a ring of cartilage. Now cartilage is, children, it is a soft bony tissue, and you can see that in this trachea there is a ring-like structure, and this rings are made up of, these are cartilage rings, and they are made up of soft bony tissue. Now children, this trachea is divided into two branches called bronchi. As you can see in the picture here, that this trachea is divided into two branches, and these branches are known as bronchi. Each branch entering, now each of the branch enter into one lung and the other branch into another lung. As you can see in the picture that one branch enter in one lung and the other branch enter in the other lung. Now we see the next organ, that is bronchi. Bronchi, it is made of cartilaginous rings. As you can see here that it is made up of cartilaginous ring, and each bronchus is divided into number of a small tube called bronchioles, which enter the lungs. Now these are small branches, and these small tubes, they are known as bronchioles. So here you can see in the diagram that this part is known as bronchi, and each bronchus is divided into number of small tubes, and these tubes are called bronchioles, and these bronchioles enter in the lungs. As you can see in the diagram that these tube-like structures, they are known as bronchioles, and from here the air enters into the lungs. Now we see the function of lungs. Now children, this we all know that human body have two lungs. Now lungs are protected by a two-layered covering membrane called pleura. Now these lungs, they are protected by a layer, and that covering name is pleura. Now pleura fluid present in between the two pleural membrane that makes expansion and contraction during breathing and making breathing easier. Now the function of this pleura fluid is that it is present in between the two pleural membrane, and it makes the expansion and the contraction during the breathing easier. Now lungs are balloon-like elastic structures. Right lung has 3 lobes and left lung has 2 lobes. So this you can see in the diagram also, that the lungs, they are like balloons and they are elastic structures, and the right lung, it has the 3 lobes and left lung has the 2 lobes. Now each lung has a number of air sacs, that is small balloon like structures called alveoli. Now these are the functional unit of lungs. These alveoli are known as the functional unit of lungs. Now alveoli are covered with network of blood capillaries for rich blood supply. Now you can see here in the diagram that the lungs, they are covered by a membrane known as pleura membrane, and there is a pleura fluid inside that membrane, and this pleura fluid is responsible for the contraction and expansion of the lungs, and it makes the breathing easier. Then other thing is that these bronchioles, they contain the number of network of small air sacs, that is known as alveoli, and these tiny air sacs are known as alveoli, and they are covered with the network of blood capillaries for rich blood supply. Now the blood capillaries surround alveoli and oxygen is delivered into the circulatory system. Now from those blood capillaries, the oxygen is delivered into the circulatory system and carbon dioxide diffuses. It moves out from the blood into the lungs and where it exhaled. So this is about the respiratory system, and now I'll teach you from the book. Now we see in the book about the respiratory system. I hope you understand about the respiratory system. Now we underline few points in the book. So everyone open your books on page number 59 and take pencil in your hand so that you can mark the underline the important points. Now as I told you, the respiratory organs in human beings, and the organs that made the respiratory organs, the respiratory system, are nose or the nasal passage. Now in this, as I told you, underline from here children, air enters the nose through the nostrils, and as I told you that while passing through the nostrils, the air is filtered. All the dust and bacteria is filtered here, and the hair traps, underline this also children, the hair traps bacteria and dust particles from incoming air, and because of this, the dust particles, they do not enter inside the body, and these hairs traps the bacteria and the germs and the dust particles there only in the nostrils. Now other thing about the nostrils, as I told you about the nasal passages, that it brings the air, the body temperature before it enters the lungs, that is, it warms up the air before it reaches to the lungs, and it also moistens the air. Now the second organ is pharynx. Now pharynx, as I told you, it is the throat region children. Now in pharynx, both food pipe and windpipe open, and I told you that the food pipe, about the food pipe and windpipe, as they both lies there in the pharynx. So this is the common passage for food and air. Underline this also, that it is a common passage for food and air. Now the third organ is larynx. Now this larynx is also known as voice box, and it is lined up by 2 pairs of vocal cords that stretch across it. Now the vocal cords, underline from here children, the vocal cords vibrate to produce sound. When these vocal cords vibrate, there is a sound which produce, and that is why we can able to speak. Now this entire structure is visible externally as the Adam's apple. Now come to the fourth point. Now the next organ is trachea or the windpipe. Now as I told you that the nasal passage leads to the back of the mouth, and this is where the trachea or windpipe begins. Okay, underline this. Now it lies just in front of the food pipe. As I told you that this windpipe is in front of the neck and the food pipe is behind the windpipe, right? So the opening of trachea is called glottis and is guarded by epiglottis. Now this epiglottis, children, it is present here just below the pharynx, and its function is that it prevents the food from entering the larynx. The function of epiglottis is that it prevents the food from entering the larynx. Now during swallowing of food, the epiglottis closes the glottis and prevents the food from entering the larynx. Now what happens, children, while we swallow the food, at that time the epiglottis, it closes the glottis, and by this it prevents the food from entering into the windpipe. Now the lower portion of trachea, it divides into two branches, that is called bronchi. Now these bronchi, they enter in the lungs and in the thoracic cavity. Now we see about the bronchi and bronchioles. Now the trachea divided into two short arms, each called a bronchus. As I shown you in the figure that this trachea is divided into two branches, and these two branches, the singly they are known as bronchus. Now each bronchus enters a lung. Inside the lung, each bronchus divided into fine tubes called bronchioles. Now inside the lungs you can see these tiny tubes, and these tiny tubes, they are known as bronchioles. Now next is lungs. Now as I told you that the human body have two lungs. The lungs are moist, bright pink, unevenly lobed structures. Unevenly lobed, that they do not have the same structure, they are uneven in structure. Now three main lobes in the right and two in the left lung. Now each lung has a number of air sacs called alveoli. As I have shown you in the picture also, that each lung has a number of air sacs, and that is known as alveoli. You can see here that these tiny air sacs, they are known as alveoli. Now these are, underline this, children, each lung has a number of air sacs called alveoli. Now these are the functional unit of lungs. These alveoli, they are known as the functional unit of lungs. Now the walls of air sacs are thin and elastic. Alveoli are covered with network of capillaries for rich blood supply. Now this alveoli, it is covered with the network of capillaries, blood capillaries for rich blood supply. As you can see here in the picture that the alveoli, it is covered with the capillaries so that the blood supply is rich here. Oxygen diffuses through capillaries from the air sacs and combines with the hemoglobin of RBCs, that is red blood cells, present in the blood. Now from here, from the capillaries, the oxygen diffuses and it reaches from the air sacs and combines with hemoglobin with our blood, and that is present in our blood. The hemoglobin that is present in our blood. Now at the same time, there is diffusion of carbon dioxide, and which comes from various tissues. So this is about the respiratory system. I hope you understand. Thank you.